Welcome to the DisabiliTEA, a podcast where we have candid discussions about all things related to disability. Short-term, long-term, financial claims, impact on other areas of life, causes in the workplace, and more. With your host, attorney Anjel Burgess. You can find this show at www.disabilityhelpline.com and on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now here's the host of the DisabiliTEA, Anjel Burgess.
Hello and welcome to the DisabiliTEA. Today we are very pleased to have a special guest with us, Ms. Debbie Dobbs, who is a special education advocate and Medicaid waiver consultant. Welcome, Debbie.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I know you've got a lot of great information to share with our audience. So why don't we start off by just having you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Well, as you said, I serve different populations of people. Many people call me because they need assistance in the public school system, whether it be gaining access to an IEP or a 504 plan because their student has a disability. And so I help families navigate for that process and look out for the child's best interest, whether it be attending meetings or just consulting with families on what their needs are. Another aspect of my practice is assisting families who are ineligible for SSI due to having means, income, or assets that are above the SSI limits, but their child has a disability. And so they're needing financial assistance. And so I help them apply for the Katie Beckett Medicaid waiver, which is specifically designed for children with disabilities.
Wonderful. And in terms of the families that you help provide services for, are these families located just in the state of Georgia, or are there other states where your families are located?
So currently right now, I am just providing advocacy in the IEP services in the state of Georgia. I really feel that it is best for families to work with an advocate who knows the people and the norms of the district of what's going on. On a rare occasion, I will accept a case out of state because these are all federal laws. But primarily, for the most part, it's the state of Georgia. Katie Beckett Medicaid, that application process is just specific to Georgia, so I only do help families in Georgia with that. But I do have some financial resources on my website, and many of those are nationwide.
Okay. Well, let's start off by talking about the special education advocacy that you provide. Mm-hmm. Under what circumstances would a family typically reach out to you for assistance?
Sure. So generally speaking, it's several different categories of people who are needing me. So one category would be a young family where the child is perhaps transitioning from babies can't wait, going into the public school system. It's going to be their first IEP. They just really need help navigating, not understanding how it works, what to ask for. Most often these are younger children. Of course, there are some children who are identified later on as well. And these people are really just needing help navigating and understanding how the system works. Another category of families who reach out to me is who are already established with an IEP or a 504 plan, and they want something different. They want more speech, for example, or more occupational therapy, or more inclusion time, or less of something else. They don't like something about their program. So I assist those families as well. The third are more emergent cases where something has happened. Maybe their child was suspended for school, and this is more of an urgent need. But for the most part, most of my families that I work with for educational advocacy have been my clients for many, many years. And it's a long ongoing relationship because children's needs grow throughout the year. So we have to figure out how to best serve them at different stages of where they are in the education system.
Okay. Do you ever have families that come to you because they believe that their child needs an IEP or a 504 plan, and they are not getting the desired response or results from the school?
That is a pretty common request. So it's somebody who is like, I have an evaluation, my child has a diagnosis, and the school is just telling me that they're doing fine.
Okay.
So that is not uncommon. So I would put those into the category of families who, I don't know how to navigate this, and I don't know how to get what I want, and I need help getting some sort of eligibility, whether it be an IEP or a 504, or really understanding what their child's needs are
Mhm.
and what best serve the child. Mhm.
Okay. So you'll help them figure out if they're not already receiving services, or even if they are, right, whether those services are appropriate for their child. Does that include, I know with IEPs, with what knowledge that I do have, which is fairly limited, but I do know that there are oftentimes meetings.
Yes.
So, will there be instances where you may need to attend the meetings with the family members?
Sure, certainly. And so, on at least an annual basis, whether it be for an IEP or a 504, you have to have a meeting. Like that's what the law requires. So I certainly attend many meetings for my clients. Luckily, things are virtual now in many instances. And so it allows me to not have much of a commute time and hit a button and be able to
Okay.
show up at multiple meetings in various parts of the state.
Okay. Wonderful. Do you find that, you know, since you're servicing families across the state of Georgia, do you find that there are sometimes certain counties that are more responsive to, requests for certain services than other counties?
Yeah, I would say so. Generally speaking, I would say that the metro Atlanta counties tend to be more aware of the laws and the rules in which govern IDEA and Section 504. And the more rural you are, there tends to be access issues as well as implementation issues.
Okay.
Generally speaking, there are some wonderful, rural districts who are providing some great services, but just generally speaking, I find that to be the case.
Okay. All right. And I'm sure from a parent's perspective or from a family member's perspective, knowing what services their child is entitled to or, has access to can be challenging. And quite frankly, I'm sure many people don't know, what the laws require in terms of services. So it's great that you're able to guide them in terms of what's appropriate for their child.
Sure, people often just don't simply know what to ask for.
Mhm.
Um, that being said, the reality is what you may be entitled to under the law can sometimes be very hard to get here in Georgia. While we have laws and rules that protect children and families, oftentimes it's not always easy to be able to access that.
Are there alternatives, in those situations that families, outside places for support or treatment that they can utilize if there is a legitimate access problem with the school?
Sure. Well, all families have their own procedural rights in terms of how to make complaints if there's a issue let's say it's implementation. Let's use, for example, a student has speech services, for example, in their IEP. And we have a national shortage right now of speech and language pathologists. So this is not an uncommon call that I get. And the district doesn't have a speech and language pathologist for the student. So the student is going without speech services that are, is currently in their IEP. And people are like, well, I don't know what to do, and I'm just not getting anything. So there are routes that a family can do and go through in order to be able to try and access that and remedy the problem and situation. First and foremost is calling an IEP and saying, hey, this is a problem. And if the district is not able to, provide an appropriate remedy, there are state complaint processes that families have a right to do. They can file for mediation. Certainly, they could also file for due process. I don't think I would recommend it just for, that. But there's options that families have to help them get what is appropriate for their children and what's in the IEP. And so I help the families guide them through, okay, what should we do here in your unique situation?
Excellent. In terms of, just any tips or anything that you wish families would know about IEPs or 504 plans that you think would be helpful, could you share a couple of those with us?
Absolutely. So documentation is key. I'm sure you understand this in your line of work. And it's the same thing with the land of special education. So if it didn't happen in writing, it didn't happen at all. If you have a telephone conversation with somebody, follow up in writing, memorialize it. I do not ever attend any meetings without recording the meetings. So I notify the districts, that's fine. They're going to record on their end as well, but every single meeting is always recorded. As a parent, it's very difficult to listen, take notes, make sure you get everything. And there's a lot of terminology that parents have to understand. And so while they're still learning all of this, many things may go by them and go past them. I want parents also to become the experts on their own children. So understand what their disability is. Know and understand the IEP. Rights Law is a fantastic website where people can go and view information on there for free. You don't have to buy a thing, and it will teach you as a parent, what the laws are, tips and tricks. It's a lot of information, but I always tell parents, be involved, look at the documents. After your meeting, you're going to get documents back. Make sure they're accurate, but you need to be your own expert and bring in other people with you. Bring your private providers, bring your tutors, bring your support personnel. And never go to an IEP meeting alone. You should always have somebody with you there just as a support system.
Okay. You actually, Debbie, brought up a question that I had about IEPs, because I hear this a lot from parents who are pursuing disability benefits for their minor children. And they will see the IEP and feel that sometimes it doesn't accurately reflect the feedback that they are getting from the teacher, right? So maybe teachers sending emails and making phone calls and saying, Timmy's disrupting class again. I had to take Timmy outside the classroom, and this is a constant occurrence. But in the IEP, it may not reflect just how severe the issue is with Timmy in class. Does a parent have any recourse if they find that the two don't match up?
Sure. Well, parents are equal members of IEP teams. So you're a participant in the IEP. So always ask, that's another tip, always ask to get a copy of the draft in advance so you have time to review through it. Don't allow them to rush you through that document. But you get to participate in the wording and of this. And if it's not reflective of your child's needs, then that needs to be put into the IEP. So there's a present levels of all IEPs. Sometimes it's called the PLAFT, sometimes it's called the PLOP, different acronyms for it, but there's present levels, strengths and weaknesses. And what we know on building an IEP is that needs create goals, and goals create services, and that creates placement. Sometimes teams don't want to document a lot of needs because they know they have to address it elsewhere in the IEP, whether it be through goals or whether it be through accommodations or supportive aids and services. So they sometimes get really hesitant because they're busy, and frankly, teachers, or often have too many children in their classroom and not enough support. And there's a lot of things that are, frankly, going against, getting your child's all of their needs identified. So we need to make sure, as a parent, and you're an equal member, I disagree, this is a need, and you have your documentation, you have all those emails from the teacher. I have, I have X amount of emails from you, and this is a need. So we need to be able to address it. And what do we do about that? Sometimes if a child is having behavior problems and issues, it might be addressed through goals and objectives. But other times, it rises to a level that we need to kind of figure out what's going on with that behavior. And so the family would request what would be called an FBA, a functional behavioral assessment, where an outside person, hopefully not the teacher doing it, is coming in and taking a look at what is the antecedent to the behavior, what's the behavior, what's the consequence, and then they would then go and try to figure out the function. Is the child doing this behavior because they're trying to escape from a situation? Are they doing it to get attention? And from there, you figure out, well, what do we adults need to be able to do proactively so we can reduce and diminish this behavior? And then what do we adults need to be able to do when the behavior occurs? Are we going to ignore it? Are we going to redirect the child? And so it becomes a written plan in terms of how to address it.
Okay, excellent. So parents, remember, you are equal members when it comes to the IEP team for your child. Those are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful words, Debbie. So
Yes.
I appreciate you sharing that, because that is a situation that I, find that a lot of my families are in when they're looking at the IEP. Perhaps they didn't have the opportunity to review an initial draft, but when they're looking at it for disability purposes and they're sending it over to me, they're saying, well, this doesn't really talk about A, B, and C and all of the calls and just all the issues. So that is a great point to emphasize. So.
Yeah, and parents can call an IEP meeting at any point in time. So if they feel like they've had a meeting and they've walked away from a meeting and are not satisfied, and let's say they get some new information, new results, new emails, new things are cropping up, you call back another meeting and say, I don't think we're adequately addressing this. We would want to do what's called an amendment, and you can have as many IEP meetings as needed.
Excellent point. As many IEP meetings as needed, parents. So keep that in mind. All right. Well, thank you for the information about the IEPs and your special education advocacy. I want to switch gears now and talk about the services that you provide as a Medicaid waiver consultant. So can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So I kind of briefly touched on it earlier. Families who are ineligible for SSI, meaning their income and or assets means are above those SSI limits, and they have a child with a disability, could be eligible for the Katie Beckett Medicaid waiver. They're waiving it. They're waiving the family's income and assets, right? Most people think of Medicaid as being just for low income people. Well, Katie Beckett Medicaid is different because they're waiving that. So you could earn $1 million or $2 million a year as a family, I hope, right? And if that's your situation, great, no problem. You could be eligible to apply for Katie Beckett. I suggest any family who has any child with any medical disability to apply, even if they think that they are not going to be eligible for the criteria. Because you have to meet what's called an institutional level of care to be able to qualify. And Katie Beckett looks at that based off of either their nursing needs, so some children have skilled nursing needs, or their developmental needs. So for children with like Down syndrome or autism or cerebral palsy or seizure disorders that cause developmental delays. Let's just say your child just has a speech and language disorder and really not much else is going on. I still suggest you apply. Your child's not going to be approved because that's their only delay. But with what they call a level of care approval, they can then apply for the Champions for Children's grant, which is through Easter Seals, which can get them to access funding. I think right now it's up to about $2,500 or $3,000 a year. So that's some money that families can gain and access. So, as our children age, let's say this is a child with Down syndrome. Parents say, oh, my child, we have great insurance benefits. I don't need Katie Beckett. Be like, well, let me tell you about what it could do for you if your child qualifies. It becomes the secondary insurance. So every time you go to a doctor, as long as you're following the appropriate rules and guidelines, in terms of making sure you're going to Medicaid provider, so on and so forth, Medicaid will pick up your deductible and your co-insurance and your copays. So you shouldn't have any out-of-pocket costs. Also, when you're eligible for Medicaid, it allows you to become access to other programs as well. So if your child has nursing needs, for example, they could become eligible for the GAP program. If your child has other developmental needs, and we know later on in life, they're going to need help with accessing the community, for example. There's waivers called the Now and Comp waiver. Well, you need to be able to have Medicaid in order to be able to access these other waivers. So, it is important to get established to show what your child's needs are. Also, when you have any form of Medicaid in the state of Georgia, if you have an employer-sponsored health insurance plan, so not a plan through the marketplace, but like one through your job, you could potentially be reimbursed for the cost of your family's health insurance premiums. So people are like, oh, my insurance is good, like I said, for that example, and I don't really need it. We don't have a lot of out-of-pocket costs. I'm like, oh, well, that's great that it's good. You may be able to qualify for this other program where you can be reimbursed for all of that money that's taken out of your paycheck. So a lot of families don't understand how this can enable you to access other funding as well.
Wow. I did not either.
Yeah.
I didn't either. That is something else.
Mm-hmm.
So there is not, or actually let me ask, is there a financial, as in a monthly, stipend or check associated with the Medicaid waiver programs with Katie Beckett?
So no, and that's a common misunderstanding from a lot of people. A lot of people think, oh, I have Katie Beckett. What are they going to pay me? Nothing. They pay you nothing. They only pay the providers directly. They don't reimburse families. You have to go to Medicaid providers in order for them to pay. And there are other rules that you have to follow. For example, if you have a primary insurance that's an HMO and has no out-of-network benefits, you are going to have to go to somebody who is in your primary, accepts your primary, and accepts Medicaid in order for them to pay. Okay. If you have a PPO plan, let's say, for example, and your pediatrician doesn't accept Medicaid, and you're fine with that, you've loved them, you're there forever, you can still go and see them, and they're just not going to file Medicaid. However, everything that doctor orders, prescribes, or refers. So your pediatrician, for example, might order an antibiotic or might order speech or OT or PT. So if they don't accept Medicaid themselves, they must be what's called an OPR provider, that they're authorized by Medicaid to order, prescribe, or refer. So these are federal guidelines. There are rules that you have to understand, just like any type of insurance. And as long as you're following those guidelines, you really, you should have no out-of-pocket costs for any, covered benefits.
Now, you mentioned that it is very difficult to actually be approved or to get the waiver. How difficult is it? Can you shed some light on that for us?
Sure. So, on my website, I do have a link. I have a webinar that I partnered with Parent to Parent of Georgia with, and it's about 2 hours long, where I walk people through the steps. It is not easy. It is complicated. It is very easy to make a mistake. It's very easy to send them in something unless you know that, maybe I should not have sent that in, or I'm missing something that they need and I should have sent that in. That being said, people can 100% do it on their own. You just have to understand the rules, and you have to understand the guidelines, and you have to understand all of these little things that frankly can change. What are the norms, and what is expected. So there's clinical guidelines that they look for in order to qualify. Not every child qualifies. So if you're looking at a individual with a developmental disability, there's certain criteria. A child may qualify because they have an IQ under 70. Or they have adaptive scores that are under 70. These are for children under 6 and over. Or perhaps they have severe autism, and that could be how they qualify. For children under 6, there's different testing that they look at in order to be able to qualify them. It's called the developmental assessment. And so you may look at the measures on the developmental assessment, and the scores based off of that could qualify the child. So for the example that I gave, a kiddo who just has a speech and language delay, they're not globally delayed. There's not an IQ problem. There's not an adaptive problem. They just have a communication issue. That individual is not going to meet what they call level of care guidelines for Katie Beckett. But for the example, an individual with Down syndrome, they may qualify due to their IQ. It might not be their IQ. They may be qualifying due to their adaptive needs. So we have to kind of take a look at totality of all of their testing, what all of their needs are, what therapies they're receiving, and the Department of Community Health then gets to make the determination status.
Okay. So it sounds like a process that there are a lot of nuances, and that it's probably best to, go through the process with a trusted advocate, someone that knows the process, knows what they're looking for, knows what the rules and the laws are, to kind of help guide you along the way. Is that accurate? Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I believe so. I don't want money to be a barrier to access to any family. At the end of the day, what is most important to me is that children get the services. So that's one of the reasons why I did the webinar with Parent to Parent. So families who don't have means for this and to be able to hire me for assistance can do their own research and can do their own time and can do that. But I also offer a level of service where people fill out their own application and I review it. That's a much less level of service than me doing it all on my own, right? I mean, obviously families have to provide me with information, but I complete the application for them. So based off of the family's needs, ability, time, resource, wanting to do it, there's different ways. But I would have to say, a huge percentage of applications that I review for families. So I'm not preparing it. Families prepare it on their own and I review it. Okay. There's critical things that they've done that are wrong that would have led to a denial that, okay, nope, let's fix it. Let's do this. Let's do that. We need to change X, Y, and Z to
Right.
allow them to be able to get to an improvement. Not everyone by any means. Sometimes I got some families who are right on track and they're all good. But I would have to say a fair percentage of those that I review have some pretty critical errors in there. And unfortunately, it takes such a it's a lot. It's an effort to pull this together and to get all of this done. People get discouraged and then they don't understand the reasons why they were denied
Right.
and what they would need to do to fix it. And then they give up. Um, Easy in the past week, I think I've spoken to probably 3 families where they are older teens and they've hired me now and they applied when their children were really young. And these are severely disabled children who should not have been denied. And for many, many, many years, they could have had access to Katie Beckett Medicaid and they didn't because they gave up. They were denied. And it just kills me.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, you've shared some really helpful information, and I want to ask you about some tips. I know you've already given us a couple as it relates to this. One that you mentioned is, if you have a child with a disability, you should apply, right? Because that, although you may not get the Katie Beckett waiver, you may be eligible for some other programs and resources. Any other tips that you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure. I would have to say one of the most important things when applying is making sure that you're sending in testing and documentation that is required. So a lot of people send it in and like they don't have the proper testing. Like, so they're denied because they're not even sending in the critical components.
Right.
So, I assist families with the applications. And one of the things that I ask for is either a developmental assessment or a psychological evaluation. And so for most of the young kids under 6, it's a developmental assessment. And probably about 50% of the time, people are uploading and sending me speech evaluations and occupational therapy evaluations and ABA evaluations. Well, those are well and good, and we're going to probably submit those as well, but it's not a developmental assessment.
Right.
So people don't really understand like what are those components and what are they asking for, and making sure that you are sending in what's required and really having an understanding of, is your child going to be approved or not based off of that? So, right, a 1-month-old with Down syndrome may have had a developmental assessment early on with Babies Can't Wait. Well, those needs may not be reflective of where they are at 2 years of age.
Right.
So if you're sending in an evaluation that's not going to be reflective of their current needs, maybe those scores are going to be too high to qualify the child for Katie Beckett. Doesn't matter, it qualified for them for Babies Can't Wait. That is going to get them denied. So you really have to know and understand every single piece of paper that you send in. What does it mean? And what is the impact of this when you're sending it in?
Absolutely. And most importantly, if you have questions, if you're not sure, how can they contact you for assistance, for a consultation?
Sure. I think one of the easiest ways for people to reach me is go to my website at www.debbiedobbs.com. It's a great website unless you're dyslexic and you miss up the D's and B's. But find me on my website. Also on my website, as I said, I have free resources. I have the webinar. I also created a document called Navigating the Maze. I'm just in the final finishing phases of updating it, but it's got over 35 pages now of free resources for families. So other grants, funding, other opportunities where they can get money. Some of them are income-based, some of them are not, some of them are disability specific. So it's a big, huge, wide range. And so I encourage people to go there. And that's probably the easiest way to get in contact with us and get more information.
Well, thank you so much, Debbie Dobbs, for providing us with a wealth of information about the services that you provide and ways that you help families. We appreciate all of you for tuning in. This has been another episode of the DisabiliTEA, and we will talk with you next time.
You've been listening to the DisabiliTEA with Anjel Burgess. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others. You can catch prior episodes at www.disabilityhelpline.com and on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.